Hey, welcome. I'm Kath Nolan, once high-performing perfectionist good girl turned goddess of balance, kicking even bigger goals. This is the podcast where we make balance doable for busy, overstretched working women, embracing your voice, honoring your feminine power, and protecting your energy. This allows you to truly step into greatness for the sake of all you hold dear. This is balance, and I am so glad you are here claiming balance for yourself. Oh my goodness, that's her. That's Sophie Scott. That was the ripple bubbling around me the first time I met Sophie. We were both presenting at this conference in Sydney for a professional association in the health sector, and people had flown in internationally to be there. Sophie at the stage was the most recognised health journalist in the country. Like, there were many weeks that you didn't go a night without Sophie Scott on the evening news. Sophie is an award-winning broadcaster. She's a TEDx speaker. She's an Order of Australia Medal recipient. And for all of the accolades, she's actually a beautiful human. She's passionate about empowering other humans to be their best. Sophie's passion is wellness. And between the journalism and her health sector specialisation, Sophie was perfectly positioned to go deep on what I like to call robust wellness. Not the fluffy, dramatic, quick fix kind of wellness promises, but I'm talking compelling studies and integratable tactics that help you to improve your life. Sophie orchestrated a career change. Now she is out from behind the camera and focused on building other well humans and targeted communicators, like high impact communicators. She's helping humans to thrive. I know that whatever your role in work or in life, this episode is going to give you an edge. I am super heartwarmingly delighted to introduce you to my friend, Sophie Scott. Sophie, the last recording that we did, honestly, I think of you as like the picture of grace. And yet so we played that recording back. So just for the benefit of those who are listening, so this is our second attempt at recording. The first attempt was a beautiful chat. I had a lovely time chatting with you. And then I heard the recording back. And early in the day, you said to me, it sounds like you let out this really sweet little giggle. You were like, it sounds like you sound like a robot from Doctor Who. But then you were just so calm and collected and completely unflappable, the graceful swan. And I played back the recording. I was like, oh my God. I didn't sound human at all. I don't know how you kept it together with that. I don't know if that was what you heard the whole time, because when I heard the recording back, it was actually both our voices that were funny and I couldn't hear that. But oh my God, for you to maintain that composure.
I sounded okay, but you definitely had that robotic Doctor Who vibe going. And it's interesting. After a while, I just sort of tuned out, but I was like, at the beginning, I was like, whoa, that's really wacky. Hope the listeners are not going to get that. But I think the second time is definitely going to work this time.
Oh, for sure. Do you know, if it was anybody else, it just would have been something to laugh about. But for you, because this is, I mean, it was just, for me, it was just, this is the epitome of your grace under pressure and, you know, your expertise in keeping your calm and beautiful communication. Is it personality or is it practice that allows you to keep that calm?
I think that's a good question. Look, I literally just came off doing a live radio interview that they texted me about half an hour before saying, are you happy to come on and talk about anxiety and performance anxiety? The journalist had done an interview last week with Robbie Williams where he talked about how when he's out performing, he feels on the one hand elated and loves it, but at the same time absolutely terrified, and you know, his heart racing, and so it was fun to talk about that. And I talked about how what really I love the idea of, rather than trying to squash down those physical feelings of anxiety or whatever you might have, to actually reframe it as excitement. And that's what the research from Harvard shows makes a big difference. Because if you think about excitement, those sort of physical sensations you get from excitement are very similar to feeling anxious, where you might feel like butterflies in your stomach and a little bit on edge. When you're excited about something, you might have a big event coming up or a big, something you're looking forward to. And so by putting that spin on it and taking the threat away from it and seeing it more as an opportunity and something you're excited about, you're just reframing how you respond to those physical symptoms rather than trying to get rid of them. And so I think having that mindset has really helped me, because doing anything like being on a podcast or doing live TV or live radio, there's that element of uncertainty. Right? You don't know what's going to happen, and things can always go wrong, and they do go wrong. As you know, but even with like broadcast television and radio, things do go wrong all the time. And it's your job as the person either in front of the camera or behind the microphone to just ensure that the audience doesn't know all this stuff that's happening behind the scenes where it's all falling apart, but to keep their experience as seamless as possible. And so I think the more calm you can be and just focused on delivering for the audience and just accepting that you may feel those feelings of anxiety, but rather than seeing it as a negative thing, reframing it as excitement. They found in all this research from Harvard that when people were actually said out loud, I'm excited about doing this, and it was things like doing karaoke for people who'd never done karaoke, giving a speech for people who were not good at giving speeches, they performed better when they vocalized and said, I'm excited about this, I'm excited about what I'm about to do, rather than either saying nothing or saying I'm feeling anxious about how it's going to go. And so I think that's a good tip to keep in mind.
That's so powerful, because so often the words that people use are, I'm terrified of this, I'm terrified of this.
And being curious, having that mindset of like curiosity about, you might be putting yourself into a new situation or outside your comfort zone, and just being curious about how it's going to go, rather than judging yourself and feeling like, you have to do a perfect job. And that's the other thing as well. People don't expect perfection. In fact, perfection is pretty boring to watch. I watched a video of two people doing a similar performance of the same sort of song, and one was very highly skilled, but they didn't show any emotion. They got it. They were perfect in their delivery of it. But there was no authenticity and no emotion. Then you saw someone giving a similar performance, and there was all this emotion, and they weren't as perfect and word perfect, but that they were way more engaging than the other person who was just focused on getting it right. And so I think sometimes we get a bit in our heads about having to have it be perfect rather than being yourself, because that's ultimately what resonates with people when they feel like they know you, rather than just some vision of someone who's getting it perfect up either on the screen or on a podcast or wherever you're appearing.
Yeah. Sophie, I agree with you completely, but I'm surprised. And I shouldn't be surprised, but I'm surprised to hear you say that, because I think when I think about you and I think about communication, my assumption is that there is a whole lot of preparation that goes into making it appear perfect, because it always looks perfect with you.
I mean, there is, and preparation is the key, because preparation is the key, because then when and if something does not go according to plan, you can fall back on the fact that you know the material really well. So for example, if you're getting up to present or you're getting up to do a workshop and your slides don't work or something goes wrong, if you haven't prepared well, then that's when you can really panic. But if you know the material so well that you don't really even need the slides, then it's just a matter of going, okay, just switching gears and going, okay, the slides are not working, but let me just explain to you what the slides were going to show. And so being really prepared and being really, really understanding and being engaged with whatever you're about to present is really key, because then you don't get as phased or as flustered if and when something goes wrong. And it's only really, when it comes to being perfect, obviously if it's something journalistic, you need the facts to be spot on. That's what I was really focused on, 100% getting that part of things right. But the delivery, you just want to come across as polished, like you know what you're talking about, but that you actually are passionate about it. That's really more than anything else is what will engage your audience. Is if they feel that you're excited and passionate about what you're talking about, then they'll be excited and passionate too, because they'll sense that from you.
Sophie, I'm so curious about so the shift that you've had. So the shift as a journalist, you have your material, you know what it is that you're going to present on. So I guess for the clients of mine who would be listening into this, who are generally professional women, who absolutely fear presentations, probably much the same as they would, karaoke, as you suggested. So for when you're doing a presentation, I guess that's a little bit more like a journalist piece of work where you have material and you're presenting that material and you know exactly what to prepare. And then you're in a space now where you are doing things like radio interviews and, you don't exactly know. I mean, you've got a couple of different specialities, so you don't exactly know what you're going to be drawn on. How do you prepare for that?
So look, one of the things I always, let's use today as an example. So I was out doing some errands today, got a text from a radio producer saying, can you come on and talk about anxiety and performance anxiety? So I texted back, sure. So the first thing I did was get on the phone and have a chat to her about, that's a pretty broad topic. So I didn't know, we really wanted to drill down and think about what she was hoping to get out of the interview and what would be the most value to the audience, because as well as the fact that some people in the audience might have to give presentations, but a lot more are probably likely to have either social anxiety or generalized anxiety disorder. So even though we talked about anxiety and performance anxiety, I did try to bring it back to something that was going to be of relevance to the audience. So really thinking about what are you offering to the audience and what's going to be the most value to them. And that changes with every audience that you have. So like you just mentioned, that your clients might be listening in. So then I always think about who I'm talking to. So, and think about that one person who might be listening, and then think, what do I want to say to that one person listening? And what do I want them to get out of this interview? Rather than feeling like you have to cover everything. Because that topic that I spoke about on radio today, it's a very broad topic. We could have gone in any direction. So the first thing I did was really just get some key facts. So, I've spoken about this Harvard study before quite a bit about reframing excitement, anxiety as excitement. But I wanted to drill down into it a little bit more. And so I just refreshed my memory and looked at the primary source again, just so that I could have it top of mind. Because, for you and your clients and for anyone listening, we always have so much information going around in our heads. Yep. But often we like to just, if you've just read something, if you've just listened to a podcast or just read a particular article or paper, that's really top of your mind. So I do try to I quarantined like the sort of 20 minutes before the interview just to think about this and just to do a little bit of research. And so that I didn't have to like dig back into think about, when did I do the last workshop on communication and presentation? What did I tell them? And it was right there. I could easily access that information. And so that can be something very helpful for people as well. If you were thinking about doing something, then make sure you're not just doing preparation in the long term, but just also right before you do it to refresh your memory about what it is that you're really trying to get across to the audience. And so that's what I did, just read the paper from this Harvard study just to really get into a bit of the nitty gritty. I also pulled together a couple of statistics, the latest stats I could find and the latest good research to do with anxiety, just to throw in a bit of, just to show how common it was, because that's another thing. You want people to feel, if they are feeling anxious, that they're not, it's not something that only they are feeling, that lots of people feel that way. And so you want people to ideally feel like they're not the only person going through something. And it seemed to go well. I got a few texts from some people who live. It was broadcast in Victoria, so I got some texts from friends in Victoria saying, "Oh, I just heard you on the radio." So it was good. I quite like, and that's one of the reasons that even though I do a lot of work now in speaking at conferences and speaking in workplaces on things like communication and well-being, whenever I get the opportunity to do some live radio or even live TV, I always say yes, because I think it's a skill that I don't want to lose that skill.
I absolutely love hearing that. It gives me so much reassurance that you do, just go back and brush up on the stats, because it seems like, and I think we always assume the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. We assume that when other people speak beautifully, it's because it just comes so naturally to them. And so hearing that you do refresh yourself on the data, that's really reassuring. That's great.
Yeah, Catherine, for some people, they might just have one topic that they talk about.
Yeah.
I've interviewed experts who have a very narrow field of expertise, particularly academics. Academics tend to really burrow down deeply into a topic and have, they might be just focused on one thing, like habits and the benefits of habit stacking or something like that. And so, if they get asked to do an interview, that's probably what they talk about day in and day out for everything they do. Whereas you and I, we're a bit broader in our scope, we've got a broader sort of scope of expertise. And so I think it is always good to just have that information in the front of your mind, so that you can be really delivering, what the audience wants, which is, your take on a topic and something that they're going to get value, and hopefully some tips that they can put into practice and sort of take away.
I love that. Sophie, you and I have both got pretty distinctive. We've both made a choice about what it is that our expertise is. But for the vast majority of the professional women who I work with, they're reluctant to do that, because I think they're sort of, they tend to be more focused on building broad leadership skills. And unfortunately, there's a need to do that, but there's also a huge risk in doing that, because you lose your individuality. You lose touch with what's most unique about you, what your leadership edge is. What's your advice to people on choosing that specialization? Because it feels risky.
That's a good point. And look, it reminds me of a conversation I had with a doctor that I was doing some coaching with just before Christmas. And, health experts are a bit like that. She's a very highly qualified medical professional in a number of specialties. So she could, be sort of hang her hat on any number of different topics within the specialties that she's got qualifications in. So I said to her, what do you want to be known for? What do you want to be known as the go-to person? So when someone is doing a story or someone's looking for a thought leader on this particular topic, they think of you. And she said she had an answer straight away. I said, okay, well, there it is.
Great.
You answered the question. You straight away said what you want to be known for. And that, in sort of marketing and sales is known as your unique selling proposition. Like, what's unique to you? What's unique to you, Catherine, or to this particular doctor that I was coaching, that sets you apart from other people? That means that when someone wants to have an expert or speak to a leader or speak to someone about a particular topic, you're the first person they think of. And that's what does set people apart, because you can be a great leader in any field and any profession and any industry, but what can you bring that's really authentic to you? Like, for some people, I've got a close friend who's a global CEO, and encouraging women in leadership positions is something that she's been very passionate about, because she has seen the benefit that has when you have women in leadership. And that then trickles down to bring more women up to the top and to put them in those leadership positions. And so whenever she does anything, she won an award the other day, and she only had like 30 seconds, but she managed to, get that into a 30-second award speech about make sure women are given a seat at the leadership table so that they can then bring the next generation of women up. And so she has chosen that as something that she really wants to be known for. And I think it does give anyone a unique opportunity to think about what are you really passionate about. And I would say that to the person listening, to think about, if you had to think about how you want to be defined, what's something that you are really passionate about that maybe other people aren't, and how that can be something that you can really focus on as something that's unique to you. And that's where doing things like a values exercise, or a strengths-based assessment to really then narrow down what are the things that matter to you as an individual, because we all do have those different values and different strengths. And then it becomes something that you don't have to work as hard at as well, because if you're playing to your natural strengths and acting in accordance to your values and things that you really care about, it actually becomes easier to write things and to do presentations, because you're passionate about it and you want to get that message out there.
I think that your journal is really useful for something like this, because it does encourage that kind of self-reflection that people don't otherwise tend to take time for.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that I developed this wellbeing journal. It's very interactive for people, so that you can take a minute, and ideally, every day just take a few minutes to focus on what your priorities are, what your goals are, how you can, what resources you need, how you're going to feel when you achieve those goals. Because often setting goals can be challenging, and seeing them through can be challenging too. But if we think about how we're going to feel when we actually reach that goal, that can often be a motivating factor to think, okay, I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to do it on the days when it feels hard, because I want to feel that way at the end. I know I want to feel that sense of achievement, and be a role model for other people as well.
I love the building of evidence that you've done it before. I think it's really powerful. Sophie, so let's say someone they've chosen what it is they want to be known for. They've chosen what it is what they want to be known for. They are still a little afraid of putting themselves out there. Are there you've interviewed thousands and you've spoken to millions. Are there some particular credibility markers that someone can incorporate into their communication to be taken as credible quickly?
So the thing we want to do, I guess the thing you want to be as a communicator is not only credible, you want to be authentic, which we've talked about.
Yeah.
That's allowing the real you to come out. You want to be credible, but you also want to be really engage the audience in a way that's memorable as well.
Yeah.
And so the way to do that is a couple of things. First of all, to really think about getting rid of any jargon that you might be using, because most professions do speak in jargon. I train a lot of health and science experts, and they have languages all of their own and acronyms that only they know, and that, like myocardial infarction, that's what a heart attack, but that's just how they speak.
Yeah.
And it's just normal to them to speak in those terms that the general public really don't understand. What happens when you use terms like that your peers might know and understand, but the general public doesn't, is then you lose that connection to bring in a broader audience along with you in your communication. So being as clear and as, getting rid of as much jargon as possible, so that you are not alienating people. Because as soon as you use jargon, the audience switches off. As soon as you start to use acronyms that people don't know what they are, we're all easily distracted. And so you need to be thinking about, and that is whether you're speaking, whether you're writing, no matter what you're doing. Jargon is a way to lose an audience. So always be on the lookout to put a big red pen through any jargon. And then one of the things that is the most powerful is to think about how you can share your own motivations, so your own motivations for why you do what you do. Because often people have a really empowering backstory about how they got into a certain profession or why they chose to do a certain thing. Like if you think about all the jobs in the world that people could do, and even with the people I work with, and all the different branches of science and medicine and health, and people could have chosen anything to work on. And so I always say to them, why did you choose to do this? What drove you to that? And often when they can talk about why, thinking about why you wanted to do this particular job, that can be where the real passion comes through. Sometimes they've got a great story about, like a family member that was affected by something, and that can really help connect with the audience when they see that you're so passionate about wanting to help people. Because, like I do a lot of talks on burnout, for example, and preventing burnout at conferences and going into workplaces. And one of the reasons that I do that is because I went through my own burnout experience, and I don't want other people to go through that as well. Like I remember how unwell I felt during that period, and I don't want anyone else to feel that way. And now I know the symptoms and the red flags and what to look for, and also what you can do to stop you getting to that stage. And so my reason for wanting to talk to people about that is so that they can protect themselves and put things into place so that they will feel good and they can still perform at a high level, but in a sustainable way. Because if we work ridiculously long hours and don't take time to look after your own well-being and looking after your own physical health and mental health, then that's when and if you've got a really overwhelming workload as well, that's when you end up feeling so burnt out that you just feel physically unwell, cognitively depleted, and then it can take you a long time to get back to feeling really good. And so that's my reason why I like to share information and knowledge about burnout, because I don't want people to go through the same thing that I went through.
Sophie, I love the way that you've, framing that you've just encapsulated a few things. You've got some storytelling in there, there's vulnerability, but framing it as a motivation, as sharing motivation, is so interesting. Do you find in sharing that story, because there are parts of that story, there are parts of your story that must really hurt. There are parts that it is really vulnerable for you to share that story. How do you pick through the parts of your story to share?
So I think I always sort of, I guess it depends on what your own story is and how much. I always say to people, look, you don't have to be an open book. You don't have to put your whole life out there for everybody to see. But if you've been through something and come out the other side and you feel that people can learn from your experience, then it can often be very rewarding for the people themselves to feel like they're making a difference by sharing their own experience. So when it comes to me, I guess what I like to think about is, sharing examples of just, particularly how physically unwell that I felt. When I was in the most severe part of burnout, I couldn't really walk for more than about 5 minutes without having to take sit down and have a rest. And that's something that, now I've gone from feeling so unwell to being able to go to the gym every day and being much more active and just feeling much better. And so I try to find things that I think, what can I share that the audience might resonate with? And so feeling overwhelmed and feeling really low on energy, or feeling like you don't have the energy to go to the gym, or you don't have the motivation to want to do things like meditation and deep breathing and self-care. And so I try to mine my own experience for things that I think others might resonate with, and then wrap it in that sense of storytelling. Because when you do use storytelling tactics, all the research shows that people are much more likely to remember what you've said, and to remember it weeks after the event as well. So I tell a story about how one of the turning points for me with burnout was I was working full time and I was flying around the country hosting events as well. And I flew up to host an event, and after working all day, and stood up to, it was an awards night, and stood up to at the podium to present the first award. And I just had this massive wave of dizziness just sort of hit me out of the blue, and I've never experienced any symptoms like that. And I really just felt like I was going to fall over and end up in the laps of the audience. Not going to be ideal.
My goodness.
And so to me, that was a wake-up call moment where I felt like cognitively I knew I enjoyed what I was doing. I was working really hard, but my body was saying to me, this is too much. You are just doing too much. And I wasn't doing what I talk to people about now, which is embedding those guardrails and those things that are going to help you be a high performer, but be a sustained high performer, which is making time for things that, like exercise and like, having fun and connecting with people and going out for coffees and just having enjoyment and not making it all about work all the time. And so I think when you can feel like you can go from, almost collapsing on stage to now, feeling well enough to, now I still am able to travel and go and speak at conferences in Australia and overseas and do those things without feeling awful. And so I think the how you spend your day and those things those practices that, I think sometimes as women in particular, we tend to sort of put them at the bottom of the list of the things to do. But these are the practices that will help you to sustain your performance and sustain your high performance over the long term, rather than sort of burning out, which is what happens if you don't have those practices, because you develop a much more flexible nervous system and you are much better able to deal with stress. That's what it comes down to. The stress doesn't go away, because stress is never going to go away, particularly if you've got, family and a busy job, but you are much more equipped, much better equipped to deal with it when you have those other practices in place, those habits, those daily habits that really set you up well. And it helps, and all the research shows that it helps to counteract the physiological impact of stress. And so I share lots of that sort of research when I'm giving talks and things. And then I also do, in workshops, I also do, some deep breathing exercises with the people in the audience, just so that they can get a sense of what it's actually like to feel their respiratory rate slow down and to feel their heart rate slow down. And people are like, oh yeah, I do feel more relaxed even after a few minutes. So you get to really feel that these are really sort of micro habits and small changes. And for a lot of people, they think, oh, you've got to go hard and change everything. And I don't know if you've heard of like the 75 hard thing, where you're supposed to do 75 minutes each day, 2 workouts and and like the thought of doing all that just makes me want to collapse. But I think in a lot of ways it's forget those hard, almost impossible to achieve. You're setting yourself up for failure with those. But what's achievable is thinking about those micro habits and just embedding micro habits throughout your day, so that you're, starting the day really well with some time for yourself to do things that are going to set you up for a really happy and productive day.
I love that. So I think that for me, my challenge with, I'm passionate about balance, and balance has a whole lot of different aspects to it. But the one that we're talking about here in terms of wellness, I've always had a bit of a challenging relationship with it, because it feels more like a reward than a foundation. So it feels like I should be doing the other things, and then I can do those fun, relaxing things that, that scream balance. You mentioned about the link between performance. What do you see as the link between balance and high performance?
Well, for example, like all the research shows that when you schedule in breaks, when you schedule in, rather than just work, but when you actually schedule in regular breaks, regular rest, that you perform better from a cognitive point of view, you're more creative, you're more productive. So so I think often a lot of us have that flawed sense that we just have to keep going and work, and then if you say I'll just get this project done and then I can take a break, I'll just do this and then I can take a break. And what happens with that is that by the time you actually get all that work done, and then you're absolutely exhausted by the end of it. And if we look at the data and the research, it shows that even just scheduling in those small little breaks of say 20 minutes, and a break can be just like a reset. So it can be like if you're working on doing some deep work, so just say you're thinking about your strategy or what you want to do over the next 12 weeks and really focusing on that in a really meaningful way. If you do that for say 90 minutes and then think, okay, I've done that, now I want to have a little 20-minute reset and just go and make a cup of tea or do something else. So having a break doesn't mean necessarily stopping working. It just means resetting so you're not using your maximum cognitive energy for the whole time. And again, what we know with research is that your brain works in those cycles. The 90 minutes where your brain works at its maximum capacity, then it needs 20 minutes to sort of reset, and then that 90-minute cycle starts again. And so we want to work in with our physiology. We want to work in with the way our bodies and brains were designed rather than working against them as much as we can.
I love that. And I love your LinkedIn tips are so good for that. They're so good for that. So many of those little insights into how we operate to be able to leverage it. Isn't it interesting how I feel as though there's two groups. There's one group that just wishes that they had something they were passionate about. I have so many clients who, particularly in workshops, will say to me, or conferences, they'll say, if only I knew what I was passionate about, then I would have all the energy in the world to put behind it and I'd be all there. And then there's this other group of people who are actually really passionate, and that can be a downfall too. Because you can get so caught up. You mentioning that, it was the passion for what you were doing that kept you blindsided.
Yes.
And maybe not noticing early signs.
And that's a good point. And I did a TED talk when I did it. That was what my TED talk was about, that you can actually be in a job that you really love or a profession and still go through burnout. And often can often be more likely because you are so engaged with it and so passionate about it that you find it very difficult to switch off. So, we find this in a lot of professions like healthcare and teaching, and where people are really engaged with what they're doing. They want to do a really good job. And they're, I know for, some people in the health profession, when I was covering health, and then I'd be reading health-related stuff on the weekends and reading scientific papers, and you just never really switch off cognitively. You're always thinking and always thinking about that job, and that can be a downside. And also for people who work in advocacy as well, because they feel like they're wedded to a cause, and they really want to make a difference, and so the more they give to this cause, the more likely it is that they'll make a difference. So I do work with people who work in advocacy, because we do see a lot of advocacy burnout as well. Because what we talked about before is just as important for people in those circumstances, for them to take care of themselves and for them to take breaks and take rest periods and recovery. And I don't think sometimes we appreciate how beneficial it is until we actually do it. And on the weekend I went to a family member has a property in the country, and because my husband had to stay back where I live with my puppy dog, and so I didn't have to worry about him or my dog. And so then I could spend the weekend actually really doing things like reading novels and doing a little bit of cooking for my other extended family that was there, And so it was actually probably even more relaxing than it would have been if I just had the weekend staying at home, just doing the usual things. So I think sometimes just thinking about what is it that you can do where you can really switch off, where you can really disconnect and disengage from that busy mind, and give yourself permission. And think you don't need permission. We don't need to give ourselves permission to take those breaks. You know, like you were saying, sometimes you feel like you have to do this and it's a reward at the end of it. But, you know, who says rest has to be a reward? You know, it's something that really, to be a high performer, it's a key part of being a high performer is building in those different types of rest and recovery, like elite athletes do. You know, like they build it into their performance schedule to have a day of rest right before a big event. They'll have a day of rest and then they'll gear up and have a practice and they'll do the real thing. And so if it works for them, then, you know, for us, it's something we can look to emulate as well.
So many lessons learned. So many lessons learned. Sophie, thank you so much for this chat. It's been really, it's been gorgeous. And again, I struggled to believe that you don't actually just have this enormous capacity for knowledge, because it doesn't seem to matter what I throw at you. You've always got some great stats and data and really interesting research. Thank you so much for sharing. I will put the links for the journal into the notes for this podcast so people can grab it. It's a fabulous tool, really fabulous interactive tool.
And look, the reason the journal is important is because the more you do something over and over, as we, you know, with neuroplasticity, it's not what you do once a week, but if you can just embed a habit and do like 5 minutes a day of it, whether that's with this journal, it's about goal setting and gratitude, you really can change your mindset, and that's the lens through that you see the world through. And we change that through our daily habits. And even if it's only 5 minutes a day of doing something, it can really reset how you see the world. And so the journal is really another tool to help people do that, and it's getting great feedback. So I really appreciate it and hope some of your listeners and get the benefit of it too.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you so much. Sophie, I'm going to stop the recording there. You know, I believe that women do help other women. I hope that this episode has empowered you to question your willingness to go last. I hope that you will embrace balance, and I'm also hoping that you will help me to help other women to do the same. So how can you help? Show your support for the work. Subscribe and review the podcast here where you're listening. Follow the Goddess of Balance on Instagram to catch some cheeky behind the scenes and extras. Connect with me on LinkedIn and share the posts with your network. That would be sensational. If you have enjoyed this program, this episode, you will no doubt love my group coaching program. You've got to find all the links to these in the little written blurb for this episode. Thank you, my friend, for normalizing balance with me. We are raising performance and reputations, wellness and equality. Together, we're creating positive change for working women, starting with you. Sincerely, I thank you for being part of the movement.